Hi, thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to show you how to prepare this entree right here. So what we're going to show you is how to do a pork roast marinated in apple cider. We're going to show you how to do caramelized apples. We're going to do a warm barley, cranberry, and apple salad. And then we're also going to do a apple cider pan sauce. So you'll learn how to make all the ingredients in this pork dish. We're going to start by taking the pork loin. Now this is a solid muscle. Obviously this is not the whole loin. Normally these are much larger. So this is the eye of the pork loin. So the pork loin is going to be very lean. It's a lean piece of meat. So we want to be careful when we cook them so that we don't overcook it and roast it. Now it also does, however, has a lot of intra-muscle fat. So that means there's a very decent amount of fat inside the muscle itself. What that does is that brings a little bit of flavor. That also helps so that these can actually be cooked in two different cooking methods. It can be used as a dry method, so like a roasted, which is what we're going to do today, or we can do a moist cooking method like a braise or a stew or so on. So again, pretty relatively easy and very versatile to use too. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean it up a little bit. Again, it's very lean. There's not a lot of stuff to remove. However, we do want to remove some of these silvery skin that's there. And the reason that we remove that is because it's very chewy when you eat it after it cooks. It doesn't, or when it cooks, it doesn't melt. So you want to remove that. You want to leave some of the fat in here. Again, that will melt. So what you do is you take your boning knife, kind of cut underneath the silver skin, but above the meat, and then I like to angle my knife up a little bit, cut that, and then I like to hold on to the silver skin here, and then basically cut away from it. So again, just remove that. That will not melt. So you do that. Leave some of the other fat that's there. That's okay. Now these you can certainly use. One thing that we do with these at the restaurant is we save a lot of these. Once we have enough of these saved for a couple days, we take these and we put them in a roasting pan, roast them, and then we make a pork stock out of it. It helps a little bit making some of that pan sauce and things like that. Adds a little bit of flavor, but just a little bit. So now we remove most of these. As you can see, I'm going to leave some of these fat that's there. We don't want to remove that. That will melt away. Now here we have a little bit of that silver skin kind of in between the muscle and the end. So I'm going to remove that. I don't want to cut straight down though. I want to try to keep the natural seam of the pork. So it's almost like carving it out a little bit versus removing it. Again, we can save these. We can put this in a pan, make our sauce. We'll add a little bit of flavor. And so here we'll do the same thing. Remove a little bit of that silver skin. And after this is done, what we're going to do with this particular one, we're actually going to brine it or marinate it overnight. Actually, not brine it, we're going to marinate it. So we have, we're going to make here in a little bit. I'm going to show you how to make a apple cider marinade. That's going to have a little bit of apple cider, some aromatics in there. So we're going to marinate these overnight. You don't have to do it overnight. A few hours will be fine. But we're going to marinate these and then we're going to sear it. Now, we are going to roast them, and one of the things that we do when we take a whole muzzle of like this, like a pork loin, like even pork chops, beef tenderloin, beef roast, whatnot, it's what we do, what we call trussing. So what is trussing? Trussing is basically taking a little bit of butcher's twine, and this is readily available pretty much in every grocery store. You can find them under either butcher's twine or roasting twine. And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap these in such a way that it will stay and keep its normal shape. What that's going to do is that's going to help it cook more evenly. But what it's also going to do is it's going to prevent the meat from expanding and kind of getting flat and wide. We want it to be nice and keep that muscle. So there's a couple of different ways of trussing. I'm going to show you my preferred way, what I think is a little easier to do. But again, there's certainly a couple different ways to do it. So we're going to go ahead and proceed to trussing these. Alright, so my preferred method though is we're going to take our butcher's twine, and we're gonna put it underneath the pork loin here, at the very top of the pork loin, right? And I like to work towards me. You can certainly work the other way, it doesn't really make a difference. But we're gonna make a simple knot right there. So we're gonna just make a simple knot, make it nice and tight so that the pork keeps its shape right there. So I like to hold on to the knot right there so that it's nice and tight. It doesn't get loosened up as I finish up the knot here. So once it's ready, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it here, and I'm going to leave enough butcher's twine here hanging from the edge of the pork right there. So I'm going to pull this, make my knot right there, and I'm going to leave enough, a nice decent piece of ribbon there hanging out. So now I'm going to take a loop. I'm going to make a loop with my butcher's twine, and I'm going to flip the twine, go under the pork loin again, go about 1/4 of an inch away from the last one, and I'm going to pull on my butcher's twine right here. That will tighten up the pork again, right? So it's starting to form there, and then I'm going to repeat that process. So a loop, turn it over under the pork, and then pull the ribbon, and I'm going to keep going with that method until I get to the edge of the pork. Alright, so as you can see, we got this, and as you can see now, it's nice and tall. It's got the butcher's twine is going to prevent it again from expanding, so it's going to keep its shape. So now when we get to the end of the pork loin here, what I like to do is I like to turn this over, right, and we're going to measure out enough of the butcher's twine to get to the end of that piece of twine that we left on when we started doing it. So we're going to cut enough there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our butcher's twine, and I'm going to go under each of those crossover twines that we had there. So that will help it stay tight, and you want to make sure that this is pretty tight when you're rolling and pulling these, and you want to make sure that it's tight enough that you can't easily put any finger or knife or whatever underneath. That will help it, again, that will help it from expanding. So again, we do this to keep the shape, to make it cook more evenly. It looks a little nicer when it goes on the plate, and so that's the reason why we do this. So we get to the top here, and now when we are done, all we're going to do is going to make a knot with those two pieces of butcher's twine that we had left over. Just a simple knot. And that's the easiest way to truss. So again, this is what I consider to be easier for me personally. Again, you can cut pieces of twine and go one at a time, certainly fine. But again, you can see these now. This will be fine. We're going to marinate these now on that cider that we're going to show you here in a minute. We're going to let these marinate overnight, ideally. If you don't want to do this overnight, a few hours will be fine. And after this is done, we're gonna sear it, start our sauce, we're gonna roast it, and we'll have dinner cooked here in a few minutes. Alright, so we're gonna talk about the marinade real quick. This is super simple. So what we have here is, we have about 2 quarts of apple cider. We're gonna put this in a pot. We have a couple of cloves of garlic. We just slice this real thin. We have a shallot, which is sliced real thin. A couple of pods of star anise. We have some brown sugar. We have about 3 ounces of brown sugar, and then we have some fresh thyme. Just a couple of sprigs we're going to put in here. So we're going to bring this up to a boil. Bring this up to a boil. Whisk it every now and again to make sure the butter melts, and so on. Once it comes down to a boil, we'll let it cook for about 10 minutes at a simmer level. We're going to cool it down, and once it's cooled down, this is what we're going to use to marinate our pork overnight. We marinated the pork overnight. Now we are going to, this is one that we had already marinated overnight, as we talked about. We pull it out of marinade. We're going to season it with salt, pepper, a nice big amount. You want some of that is going to absorb to the inside, but just salt, black pepper. We have a little bit of hot oil in here, we're gonna go ahead and sear these. So we're gonna put it in our pan, let it go until it's nice and brown. We're gonna rotate it until all sizes are nice and golden brown. And then what we are going to do from here is we're gonna put this in an oven at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we're gonna cook it until it reaches an internal temperature of 145 degrees. So you can see nice golden brown on the one side. I'm gonna turn it over, let that side get nice and brown. And I'll just keep doing that until all sides are brown. And as you can see now, this is where the trusting is starting to hold some of that shape, and it's gonna keep nice and even shape. So we're gonna go ahead and sear that. Now, before we put this in the oven, what we're gonna do is we're gonna transfer this into a roasting rack. So just a tray with some sort of rag that will elevate the pork. What that's gonna do is is going to let the air, and I'll show you here in a minute, but that's going to let the air in the oven get all the way around the pork, right? So it's gonna cook again more even. It's gonna be a more even cooking. All sides are gonna be the same color. If you don't have a roasting rack, you can certainly use just a regular tray for the oven. That's absolutely fine. We prefer using the roasting rack method because again, it's gonna help more even cooking. So once this is done, we'll be ready to cook it. All right, so the pork is ready to go. This is the roasting rack that we're gonna put it in, right? Again, this is just gonna make it for allow the heat in the oven to get more evenly. That also is gonna prevent the metal on the pan from getting too hot and really getting one side of the pork very, very crispy. So now we're gonna save the pan that we sear it in. We have what we call fond here. So we're gonna start our sauce. As this is roasting, we're gonna start our sauce. All right, so we are gonna accompany this pork with a warm barley salad. So what we have here is we have cooked barley. Now I cook this in what I call the pasta method. So a lot of water, put in the barley, and we basically let these cook. We want a boil, but not a rolling boil. And we cook this until it's cooked through. The barley has expanded. Some of the outside, the inside of it you can see. So it starts to open up a tiny little bit. So it's already cooked. So we're gonna add a little bit of shallots. We have about an ounce of shallots or so. This is a couple cups of barley. We have a couple of cloves of garlic. We have some toasted pumpkin seeds here, a tiny little bit of arugula, a couple leaves of arugula, some cranberry, and some apples. So we're gonna we have here a pan with a tiny little bit of oil to get some of these sauteed up, and that's what we're going to accomplish. I'm going to walk you through this. All right, so we're going to start our salad here. We're going to add a little bit of the shallots. The oil is nice and hot. You want to be careful here when you add these because you don't want to burn the shallots or the garlic. They're cut real fine, so they are going to cook pretty fast. So over a low heat, we're going to cook these for about a minute or so. We're going to add our garlic, cook this for about a minute or so. This is going to release some of the oil, the aromas, and so on. Now, I like to season as I go when I'm doing layers like these, especially in something that's not going to cook for a very long time, but you do want to be careful that you do not over season it. So I like to put a tiny little bit of salt and a tiny little bit of pepper. That's going to season the shallots themselves. I'm going to add my apples. We want to get a little bit of, couple more minutes here, right? Again, we want to make sure we don't burn it. We want to make sure our heat is low, right? So we add that again. I'm going to season in layers here, so I'm going to add a little bit of salt, very tiny little bit, right? Little pepper. This is going to go for a couple of minutes. Right. I'm going to add the barley. Now this is already cooked, right? We cooked this ahead of time. So now from here on out, what we're going to do is warm it up. So we're going to put this here, lower heat, and we're just going to keep on stirring this until it's nice and heated all the way through. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and move into adding the rest of the ingredients and serve the salad with the entree. The pork is roasting. We got our barley almost done. We just gotta add our last couple garnishes. We're gonna lower the heat on these. I have a little bit of wine, some butter. I have about a shallot, so I'm gonna start by adding the shallot in here and being careful not to burn it, but we're gonna sweat these a little bit, right? Now, you certainly don't have to use the wine. You can just use the, we have some apple cider here. Now what this is going to do is, when we were cooking and searing that pork, it created what we call fond. So adding the liquid to the pan, like the cider, what it's going to do is it's going to take all that sauce and all the fond off the pan, and what we're going to be able to do now is we're going to be able to start the base for our sauce. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to make our caramelized apples, right? So I have some apples here. I have a couple already cut. I'm going to show you how to cut these. It's going to be very simple. I have Honey Crisp apples here. I like their sweetness yet tartness of it. It's got what I think is a nice, beautiful balance of flavor. You can certainly use Gala apples. You can use Jonah apples. You can use any other type that you prefer. We also have a little bit of brown sugar. We have some cinnamon, one cinnamon stick. We have this is about a cup and a half of brown sugar. We have 1 pod of star anise. If you cannot find the star anise, you can use powdered anise. You just gotta be a little bit more careful with it because the flavor is gonna be a lot more intense. So just a pinch will be fine. We have the juice of 1 lemon, and we have a couple of ounces of butter. So we're gonna cut this into wedges. So we're gonna take our apple, we're gonna come right down the middle, and then we're gonna go right down the middle again. Now we're gonna take our knife at a little bit of an angle and cut the core out of there. Right, so we remove that core and the seeds. Now we're gonna cut these again in half. So now we have wedges. We're gonna do the same thing with the other. Now these are gonna be a nice complement with all the other fall flavors we have going on in this dish. So these are gonna take maybe about 10 minutes or so. We don't want this to be like an applesauce. We just want them to be nice caramelized but still have a nice bite to it. Once we have our wedge here, we're just going to take our knife, and I like to, if this is a 90-degree angle, I like to come about a 45-degree angle and cut kind of on a bias. So we have a nice bias wedge, if you will. We're going to put our butter in here, let the butter melt a little bit. We don't want it to brown, we just want it to melt a little bit. So we're going to start with a high heat, but then we're going to lower it. So as this is melting, we're going to add our apples in here, right? We're going to add our sugar. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try to sprinkle the sugar or evenly distribute the sugar as best we can amongst the apple. Now this is going to be just a little bit of sugar to kind of get the process of the caramelization started. But really what's going to do a lot of the work is those natural sugars in the fruit, right? So we are going to let our butter, our sugar kind of melt together. We're going to add a little bit of lemon juice. Right, what this is going to do is this is going to bring out all the flavors together, kind of helping marry together. But then what it's also going to do is it's going to also prevent the apples from oxidizing, right? We want them to be caramelized and have a nice color, but we don't want them to turn like real dark brown when they oxidize. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add our cinnamon and we're going to add our star anise. We're going to let this cook over medium to high heat. Every once and again we're going to come in. This is going to take about 10 minutes or so. It might take a little longer depending on the heat and your stove and the apples and how big you cut them and so on. But 10 to 15 minutes will be a good rule of thumb. Every once and again we're going to come in and toss these around so that they get a nice caramelization all the way around. But this is it. Once these are done, we're going to make sure to remove the cinnamon and the star anise before we serve them. So all that fond is flavor, right? As long as it's not burnt, that's going to add a lot of flavor to it. And as you can see now, everything that was on the pan is now incorporated into the sauce. So we're going to bring our apple cider here up to a boil, let it boil, and then we're going to slowly add the butter to create an emulsion, which we talked about in other videos as well. So that's going to be our pan sauce that we will serve with the pork. So we'll let this come up to a boil over high heat. As you can see now, there's a little bit of consistency here in the sauce. Now, if you've been watching some of our videos, this method might look very familiar to you. So in one of the videos that we did before, we made a beurre blanc sauce, where we took a little bit of vinegar and lemon juice, and we reduced that down, and we added a little bit of butter. Same concept, same technique, right? This is not a traditional beurre blanc. That's what we're calling a pan sauce, right? This is how you make a pan sauce, but it's the same technique of a beurre blanc. It's also the same technique of making a pan sauce where we did our chicken a while back. So we sauteed the chicken, added our lemon juice, added our capers, and so on. Same technique. So as you can see, everything about cooking is once you know the techniques behind it and the fundamentals behind a technique and why we do things the way we do them, you can expand it and make it, and at the end of the day, it's all going to be the same technique. It's just what you do and what ingredients you use them for. So our sauce is ready here. As you can see, it's not going to be super thick because we don't have a thickener in here. We don't have a starch. We don't have a flour. We don't have a roux, cornstarch, any of that. So it's not going to be super thick. But now you can see that it's starting to get a little bit of body to it, and this is going to be ready to go with the pork. Alright, so we have our pork is done. We talk about the sauce, that was ready to go. We talk about the apples, those are ready to go. We're going to finish up our salad here. So the last thing, and you want to wait till the end to do these because these are going to be ingredients that are you don't want to cook or you don't want to overcook, I guess, right? So we're going to have a little bit of our pumpkin seeds. So we're going to toss them in here. We're going to add our cranberries in here. And then we're going to toss these together. And then the very last thing we're going to do, kind of warm this up just a tiny little bit. And the last thing we're going to do is going to take our arugula and we're going to toss these together, and that will be our salad. So now we're ready to plate. We're going to show you the plating here in a minute. Alright, so we're ready to plate here. What we're going to do is we're going to show you how to now take that butcher's twine that we did, right? So what I like to do is I like to put the pork, start from the bottom, right? And then just basically take a knife or a pair of scissors and then just cut that, and that will start to come off here. So without cutting into your pork, so you don't want to cut the pork and start to get all the juices to come out and get dried out. So once you remove your butcher's twine, it's now you are ready to slice and serve. All right, so we're getting ready to plate. So we're going to start by putting our salad. Now I like to put our salad right here, kind of like a 12 o'clock. If your plate was a clock, I like to put these at about 12 o'clock. So we're going to put our salad there, right? This will add a little bit of height to the plate. This will add a little bit of height where we can put our pork in. So we'll do that. Now we have our apples. Now remember, the key is that we need to take that cinnamon stick and that star anise away from or off the pan, right? We don't want to put that on the plate. So we're going to put our apples right here at about 3 to 5 o'clock on the plate, right? Now, for the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take our pork and we're going to slice it, right? After it came out of the oven, we let it rest for about 10 minutes. What that's going to do is that's going to get all the juices to kind of get back into the meat, into the middle of the meat. And so when you cut, it's going to be super nice, super moist, versus cutting it as soon as it comes out of the oven and having all the juices on your cutting board, and it's going to dry out the pork, right? So we're going to go ahead and cut a couple of slices of pork. Now, this is cut. The last thing we want to do is we're going to take our sauce. Now, we work really hard to get a nice, beautiful crisp on the outside of the pork. We work really nice to get the nice, beautiful juiciness of the pork to stay in the meat. So what I prefer to do when I do a sauce is I always put the sauce underneath the protein itself. So I'm going to put a little bit of that sauce that we made. And then we're We're gonna take our pork and we're gonna lay it out right kind of in the middle. And finally, we can go ahead and drizzle just a little bit of the sauce over that, but just a little bit. You don't wanna drown it with sauce and get rid of that beautiful crust and so on. So that's the way to do it. We hope you enjoy the video. We hope that you join us for the next one, and see you next time.
Hi, my name is Rayleigh Harper with the School of Hospitality Management and Culinary Arts at Columbus State Community College. We hope you're enjoying our new YouTube channel and would love for you to subscribe to see more videos and chef demonstrations. Also, please visit us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Lastly, you can visit cscc.edu, the hospitality department page, if you would like to learn more information about our programs and our school.